This is a CBS News special report, Campaign 76. Tonight, the final session of the Republican National Convention from the Kemper Arena in Kansas City. This portion is sponsored by Mailgram, impact of a telegram at a fraction of the cost. Now, here is Walter Cronkite.
Good evening, and this is the last night of the Republican National Convention here in Kansas City, the 31st time that this party has met, and tonight it puts the stamp of approval on a ticket that is Gerald Ford, the President of the United States, running for election for the first time, and his choice for the Vice President to run with him, Robert Dole. 53 years old, two-term senator from the state of Kansas, a staunch conservative. The naming of Dole earlier today constituted quite a surprise here in Kansas City. He was not considered to be among those in the final running as the president considered who he wanted to run with him, but that was the announcement earlier today. Tonight, we will hear the nominating of Robert Dole. That is the balloting for him. There will be probably one other name mentioned in that balloting, Senator Jesse Helms of North Carolina, leader of conservative forces. He will have an opportunity because he will be placed in nomination to make one last conservative speech from this platform before the vice presidential acceptance speech of Robert Dole and then the presidential acceptance speech of President Ford himself. Also, in the course of this evening, between those two speeches, Cary Grant, the movie actor, will introduce Mrs. Ford for brief remarks. And now, the opening ceremonies at this last session of the Republican Convention.
The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by a man who addressed this convention on Tuesday. He is a veteran of the Vietnamese War, a prisoner of war for several years, decorated for courage and valor, Colonel Raymond Schrump, a delegate from the state of North Carolina.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a result of my address the other night, I have received a flood of telegrams. I would like to be able to read them all, but there was one that touched me so deeply, I'm going to read it tonight. Sergeant Timothy Bowden, Illinois, missing 3,360 days in Vietnam, and his family thanks you. Only Hanoi knows where I am, dead or alive. My country, America, sent me to Vietnam. Don't let them forget me now. I plead a strong commitment now from the President to locate me and all prisoners of war in absence. Sergeant Timothy Bowden, missing in action, Laos, January the 9th, 1967, by Mrs. Dorothy Bowden, Downers Grove, Illinois. I ask that we make this Pledge of Allegiance in honor of all Americans who, through their personal sacrifices, has made it possible for Old Glory to fly over the home of the brave and the land of the free. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
The national anthem will be sung by that popular entertainer, a delegate from the state of California, Pat Boone. He will be accompanied by Manny Harmon and the Bicentennial Convention Orchestra.
Fellow delegates, and Republicans, brothers and sisters, I imagine we're all a little hoarse from yelling for our candidates last night. I am. But tonight we all have the same candidates, the same party, the same nation, the same anthem. So let's all sing it together with the same kind of enthusiasm we had last night, okay? Manny?
lot of empty seats here as this session of the Republican Convention opens, but it is opening a half hour earlier than the past ones, and also exactly on time, as has every one of these sessions except the first, and that was 3 minutes late. Something of a record for political conventions being established here in Kansas City. The Republican National Convention coverage by CBS News will resume after this message.
Offense, may we bring pardon. May we bring union in place of discord, truth replacing error, faith where once there was doubt, hope for despair, light where there was darkness, joy to replace sadness. Make us crave not so much to be loved as to love. Use each of us, we pray, as such an instrument in your world today. We are humbly thankful, O God, for our country, for the richness of our resources, for our heritage of freedom.
Pastor Clay Miney of the First Lutheran Church of Mission Hills, Kansas, just begun the invocation.
Those who would govern over us. We do remember before you this night and ask your special blessing for our President, Gerald Ford, for our Vice President, our senators and members of Congress, and for all who are in positions of authority and decision-making. Grant them wisdom and courage to lead and govern with honor and integrity, and with justice and compassion. And we also pray, O God, that upon this convention gathering on this historic occasion, and upon the chosen candidates of this party, and all that will be said and done in the campaign of the weeks and months ahead, that you may add your guidance and your blessing. Amen.
Now that the Republicans have a ticket, let's see what kind of reaction to it our floor correspondents are getting. First, Dan Rather.
Walter, the delegates that I have talked to, and this is a unanimous reaction, are neither happy nor angry with the selection of Bob Dole. Now, when I say unanimous among those delegates with whom I've talked. Time after time, delegation leaders and party powers in their own localities say, look, Bob Dole was picked because he's the least offensive to the most number of Republicans in this hall. All of them express, as of now, some doubt as to whether the ticket, number one, can be elected, and number two, whether it'll help their local candidates. If I could sum up the overall reaction I've heard the most, it is, what do you think of the selection of Bob Dole? I'll look away, never look you in the eye to say, well, okay, but I'm not excited about it. Now to Mike Wallace.
Well, Dan, I'm down here in the Hawaii delegation, and they say, what do you mean Dole isn't a household word? We here in Hawaii hate you for saying that because Dole is on just about every pineapple can in America. The fact is, Dole is not only not a household word, there just is no enthusiasm down here in this quadrant for him. The Northeast states say that he can do nothing, bring them nothing against Carter Mondale. And the Southern states say they wonder if Rogers Morton was right when he said that President Ford was going to write off the Cotton South. What we get down here is mainly bewilderment. They're still trying to sort the thing out. Now to Roger Mudd.
There's no bewilderment here, just a general ho-hum from those states where you would expect the approval, Colorado and Montana and Georgia. There's been approval, nothing electric, but general approval because Mr. Dole is a conservative. from those states where you might expect a kickback on this Dole selection, Rhode Island, Wisconsin, Minnesota, there hasn't been much of anything. One Wisconsin delegate said, well, Bob Dole is all right. He'll help us build a party. Now to Mort Dean.
Roger, I just talked with Senator Jacob Javits, the liberal from New York, and I said, will Dole help or hurt in the Northeast? He said he will neither help nor hurt. He said it was a choice President Ford made probably to get out of this convention unscathed, meaning Dole is neither disliked nor liked by most of the people here. And the senator said that perhaps in the Northeast people are going to learn that Bob Dole is a bit more sophisticated than many Easterners think he really is, and that might prove to be a positive sign in November. Walter?
There are going to be some other names mentioned as the balloting goes on tonight for the vice presidential nomination, although undoubtedly the president's choice will be respected here. First of all, we mentioned earlier that Senator Jesse Helms of North Carolina will be placed in nomination, and that's so that he will have an opportunity to speak from the platform with one final rousing conservative speech. He's the leader of the so-called independent conservatives in the party, was the man who wanted to have Senator James Buckley run for the presidency here, you remember, earlier on in this week. Also, there'll be some sort of votes cast, some in tribute to members of delegations, some perhaps in sort of a complaint over the Dole selection. For instance, we reported that 2 Arkansas delegates plan to actually vote for Senator Helms, although he will withdraw his name officially from consideration after he makes a speech, we're told. One delegate intends to vote for Senator Schweiker for vice president. That was Reagan's choice, you know. There are some West Virginia delegates, or some Virginia delegates, who plan to vote for Senator William Scott of Virginia in tribute to his work in the delegation. That sort of thing probably will go on. One thing that has happened here today, we should bring you up to date from earlier this morning, 2:30 this morning as a matter of fact. The draft Reagan movement, which the Florida delegation particularly worked on throughout the night, has apparently collapsed, mostly because Ronald Reagan, although he left the door open for that, said later on in the day he definitely would not accept the draft. They're introducing the Cabinet of the United States now from the podium, and let's go to that podium.
Simon. The Secretary of Defense and Mrs. Rumsfeld.
Secretary of State Kissinger was introduced first. He got a round of applause. The hall is not anywhere near filled. Perhaps a fourth of the delegates and almost none of the spectator seats are filled. Introduce now William Simon. Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld.
The Attorney General and Mrs. Levy. The Secretary of the Interior and Mrs. Kleppe. The Secretary of Agriculture, Mrs. Earl Butts. The Secretary of Commerce and Mrs. Richardson. The Secretary of Labor and Mrs. W.J. Ussery. The Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, David Matthews. The Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and Mr. Hills. The Secretary of Transportation, and Mrs. William Coleman. Counselor and Mrs. Robert Hartman. Director of the Office of Management and Budget, James Lynn. Counselor to the President, John Marsh.
These members of the Cabinet and of the official White House staff are up in the glass-enclosed booths, and there you can see them now.
And Mrs. William Scranton.
It's difficult to get light on them so that they could be seen at all. You can't see much of them as it is. As you see there, that's Elliot Richardson of Commerce and Earl Butts, Secretary of Agriculture. Looks like Senator Tower down in front of them. It is Senator Tower of Texas. down there in the lower left-hand side of your picture. There he is. He was going to be the floor manager for President Ford here until he didn't get elected a delegate from Texas in that Reagan sweep of the state. Eric Severide and Bill Moyers have some thoughts about this Republican ticket.
Well, mine aren't very original thoughts. I don't know if Bill's are. I would guess that one big consideration must have been to find somebody for vice president here who would finesse any possibility of a draft Reagan movement. Connolly could have done that, but he didn't want to go to Connolly. Dole may not unify them a great deal, but he doesn't disunify them any further, would you think, Bill?
Not at all, and he also brings to the ticket something that Gerald Ford doesn't have, which is a combativeness to go after Jimmy Carter. Dole is a practitioner of the brass rule of politics, Eric. It's do it unto others before they do it unto you. He almost got beat in his re-election campaign in 1974 because he'd been so closely associated with Richard Nixon as chairman of the Republican National Committee. He took off the gloves, ran the most effective advertising campaign, attacked the Democrats, and won by 2 points. That's the kind of fighter he is.
In many ways, a remarkable fellow. This is a true war hero. This is a man who lay in hospital during or after the war for over 3 years, I think, terribly wounded. Done it all on his own. Man of great confidence. He'd be quite a campaigner. I would think that he would occupy in the campaign the relationship to Ford that Richard Nixon had to Eisenhower in '52. Nixon did the rough and tumble work while Ford took the higher road and was Mr. Nice Guy, Eisenhower did, which Ford will do this time. Somebody's got to go after Jimmy Carter hard. That's what they want to do. They think they can puncture a lot of his balloons, his air of righteousness, and what they think are his inconsistencies. And they want to do that. They've been talking about Carter in this convention as though Carter were the incumbent they're trying to unseat. So they've got to change that. They've got to get on a positive note and, of course, go after the Democratic Congress, which is what they'll do.
They'll have to do more than simply attack, however. If you look at the figures, at the way Richard Nixon won in 1972, he cut very heavily into the old Democratic coalition. He took the South. He took 51% of the blue-collar vote. He took over half of the Catholic voters and a third of the Jewish voters. And you have to ask, can two Midwestern Republicans from rural areas, in effect, small towns, repeat those gains that Nixon made in 72?
A very big question. We're a bit pressed. We'll give it back to the anchor room, Walter Cronkite.
We are about to get the balloting for the nominations, the roll call for nominations for the vice presidential balloting here on the floor of the convention. The chairman of the convention, John Rhodes, the congressman and House Minority Leader from Arizona, is explaining the rules of the roll call, and we might listen in for that because immediately following that the roll call begins. Back to the podium.
President shall not exceed 15 minutes. When the names of candidates have been placed in nomination, the chair will ask the secretary to call the roll of states for the purpose of voting. Under Rule 16 of the convention, once the secretary has begun to call the roll, it cannot be dispensed with for any reason. Therefore, all states will be called. If any state desires to pass at this time, it may, of course, do so. At the conclusion of the first call of the roll, the secretary will proceed to call the names of those states which passed. No delegation will be recognized to change its vote until all delegations which have passed have been given a second opportunity to vote. This is in accord with Rule 18B. Finally, and I hope you will listen to this because there was some confusion about it last night.
While we listen to the rules, Dan Rathers with Senator Jesse Helms, whose name will be placed in nomination later tonight. Dan?
Senator Helms, how did this happen? How was the decision made that your name would be placed in nomination?
Well, I didn't make it, that's for sure. It sort of crept up on me. It's nothing to it, really.
Well, you will get some time up at the microphone. That's the most important thing. What are you going to say, in essence?
Well, I think I better wait. It's about 2 minutes worth, and I wrote it in the car coming, so
let me tell you
what. Let me have one surprise.
One surprise. One member of the...
I don't think I'm going to surprise you, Dan, rather.
Well, one member of your delegation, the North Carolina delegation, said, quote, what he's going to do is give the liberals in this party hell, unquote. Is that true?
Well, that may be some slight exaggeration.
Now, do I understand the plan correctly?
I don't give anybody that. I just tell the truth, and they think it's that, you know.
Now, do I understand the plan correctly? Your name's going to be placed in nomination, and as soon as you speak, then it'll be withdrawn.
Well, let's wait and see.
Walter, Senator Jesse Helms.
Okay, they're just beginning to call the roll of the states. Here it goes. I might point out that there is also a report that Jesse Helms, in that speech, will call for unity in that brief speech, as well as perhaps get a couple of last conservative licks in.
Please take your seats. We are about to proceed with the roll call of the states for the purpose of the nomination of the next Vice President of the United States. It would be appreciated if all delegates would be in their seats, and only those persons in the delegate section who are entitled to be there, either delegates or persons who are sitting in as alternates or other qualified individuals under the rules of the convention. Now, if you will please take your seats, be quiet, and listen to the secretary as she calls the roll of states.
Yes. It's okay.
Alabama.
What's your name?
Madam Secretary, due to an accident on the road at which it had the traffic detained, our bus bearing most of our delegation has not arrived yet. So the state of Alabama passes.
Alaska.
Madam Chairman, the great state of Alaska would like to yield to the great state of New York.
Arizona.
Madam Chairman, the great state of Arizona and the home state of our permanent convention chairman and secretary at this time passes.
Arkansas.
Madam Chairman, Arkansas passes.
California.
Madam Chairman, California passes.
Colorado.
Mr. Chairman, Colorado passes.
Connecticut.
Madam Secretary, Connecticut passes.
Delaware.
Madam Secretary, Delaware passes.
The District of Columbia. The District of Columbia. The District of Columbia. Florida.
Madam Secretary, Florida passes.
Georgia.
Georgia passes.
Guam.
Madam Secretary, the beautiful island of Guam passes.
Hawaii.
Oh, Hawaii passes.
Idaho.
Madam Secretary, state of Idaho passes.
Illinois. Illinois.
Illinois passes.
Well done. Indiana.
Madam Chairman, Indiana passes.
Iowa.
Iowa passes.
Kansas.
Madam Secretary, may I inquire as to whether the state of Alaska yielded to New York?
Yes.
Very well.
Yes.
In that case, Kansas passes, but will be heard from later.
Thank you. Kentucky.
Madam Chairman, Kentucky passes.
Louisiana.
Madam Chairman, Louisiana passes.
Maine.
Madam Secretary, Maine passes.
We'll be back in 1 minute with
Maryland.
more CBS
Madam
News
Secretary,
coverage of the Republican
Madam
National
Secretary,
Convention.
A delegate from Maryland has a nomination.
passes.
Missouri.
Madam Secretary, Missouri passes.
Montana.
Madam Secretary, Montana passes.
Nebraska.
Madam Secretary, Nebraska passes.
Nevada.
Madam Secretary, Nevada passes.
New Hampshire. New Hampshire.
Madam Secretary, New Hampshire passes.
So, Mary Crisp, Mrs. Mary Crisp of Arizona, Secretary of the
Madam
Convention,
Secretary,
continues to call the
New
roll.
Jersey
Most of the
passes.
states are passing. Of course, we know how it is all going to come out. We believe with the nomination of Robert Dole and a momentary nomination to be withdrawn for Senator Jesse Helms of North Carolina. Bruce Morton on the podium can explain the nomination procedure to us. Bruce?
Walter, there's almost nothing to explain. Getting nominated for president under Republican rules is complicated. It takes majority support from a total of 5 states. Getting nominated for vice president doesn't take anything except one delegate and one delegation who wants to nominate you, one candidate who wants to be nominated. That means that anybody can run just about, and people run for all sorts of reasons, usually simply if they're not the president's choice, that is, because they want to make a speech. That's apparently the case with Senator Helms tonight. While we were away on that last commercial, Maryland said it had a nomination to make. We assume that will be the Helms nomination, and that the Maryland delegate involved is the conservative congressman from Maryland's Eastern Shore, Richard Bauman. In any case, nominations are simple, as I say. There are really no rules. The nominees get a chance to speak, make their point, gracefully withdraw, and voting is, for all practical purposes, fixed. Walter?
As we continue this call of the roll to see whether they have a name to put in nomination or not, come up with a rather interesting bit of research by Chris Kelly on the vice presidential choice by President Ford. What he finds is that when Senator Dole was having his uphill fight here in Kansas a couple of years ago for re-election against Dr. Bill Roy, and looked like he was going to lose. All of the polls showed that Roy was way ahead. At that time, Senator Dole was on our CBS television program, Face the Nation, and he was asked if he thought that the Watergate and ensuing things had any bearing upon the election and the fact that he was running behind. And Senator Dole said, "I think so." He was asked specifically, was President Ford an issue? And he said, "I think so." He said that Kansas Republicans had been encouraged when Mr. Ford first took office, but, and these are his words, along came the pardon of former President Richard Nixon and amnesty for Vietnam War draft evaders and deserters. I really don't need any more help of that kind before November. Senator Dole said of President Ford, the man has now selected him as his running mate in the 1976 campaign.
Mr. Chairman, it's the press as much as the delegates.
The chairman is calling for order.
And will you please not impede the progress of the convention? The delegate from Utah.
Utah.
Well, Madam Secretary, I see no progress being made in this aisle.
I'll come back to him. Vermont.
Madam Secretary, in honor of the birthday of United States Senator George D. Aiken, the state of Vermont passes.
Virginia.
Madam Secretary, the Commonwealth of Virginia passes.
The Virgin Islands.
Madam Secretary, the Virgin Islands passes.
Washington.
Madam Secretary, Washington passes.
West Virginia.
Can I speak here? West Virginia passes.
Wisconsin.
Madam Secretary, Wisconsin passes.
Wyoming.
Wyoming passes.
The District of Columbia.
District of Columbia passes.
Utah.
Well, Madam Secretary, there's still no progress on this aisle, but Utah passes.
Thank you. This, Mr. Chairman, concludes the calling of the roll.
The state of Alaska having yielded to the state of New York, the chair now recognizes the chairman of the delegation from the state of New York to place a name in nomination for the office of Vice President of the United States.
That's Richard Rosenbaum, the chairman of the New York delegation. He will introduce Vice President Rockefeller, who will be the man who will actually place Senator Dole's name before the convention. The seconding speeches will come from Peggy Pinder. We saw an interview with her just a night or two ago. She's a blind,
May I please have
young
the
blind
attention
delegate
of the
from
New York
Grinnell, Iowa.
delegation?
Quite a person. Then Art Fletcher, former Undersecretary of Labor, and Senator Paul Laxalt, who nominated Reagan for president, was chairman of his
Our phone
campaign.
is plugged in, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman,
gentleman is
approaching the
recognized.
podium is a great leader of our party, a man whose distinguished service to the Republican Party, to the state of New York, and to America has earned him an enduring place of high honor in the history of our country. New York's favorite son, for the purpose of nominating another great American, I present to you the greatest Vice President of the United States, the dynamic and honorable Nelson A. Rockefeller.
Incidentally, if there are any Alabamans tuned in who were concerned about that announcement that the Alabama delegation bus had been in an accident and delayed the arrival of the delegation here, we checked up on that right away here at CBS News, and it turns out that there was no accident. The bus was simply delayed in traffic. And the Alabama delegation's quite all right and is now, I assume, arriving at the hall. Nelson Rockefeller, Vice President of the United States, longtime governor of New York, will put into nomination the name of Senator Robert Dole, the 53-year-old two-time conservative senator from Kansas, who is Gerald Ford's choice as the man to run with him in 1976 against the Democratic ticket. Nelson Rockefeller took himself out of consideration for the vice presidency last fall, as you'll remember. It was a bid to help unify the party behind President Ford. At that time, there already was strong pressures being built up in the conservative ranks, and this was before it was known whether Ronald Reagan would enter the race or not, for Rockefeller to be dumped, as well as Secretary of State Kissinger. Rockefeller bowed out in what was considered to be a bid to keep Ronald Reagan from entering the race at all. It failed, partly because perhaps Kissinger himself stayed in. And indeed, Secretary of State Kissinger has been a target of the Reagan and the conservative forces here since this convention began. They got a minority report in the platform that indirectly criticizes Secretary Kissinger and the Ford administration's policies on détente and other associations with the Soviet Union, particularly the Helsinki Declaration on Human Rights, and what they considered the administration's snub of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Soviet author and who was thrown out of his own country, exiled last year. When he came to the United States, the White House did not receive him. It was reported at the time because Kissinger had advised it might upset Moscow. The man who Nelson Rockefeller will place in nomination in a moment, Robert Dole, has a strong conservative record. He could hardly have picked a more conservative senator. Americans for Democratic Action last year, which rates the senators on the basis of their votes on key issues, gave him only a 17 rating. The Americans for Conservative Action the year before had given him an 84 rating, about as high as you can get. But last year dropped him because of a couple of votes they didn't like, down to 67 rating. COPE, the labor political organization, gave him a 24 rating last year and 18 the year before. Our research shows that among his most conservative positions have been those on tax reform.
Fellow delegates, ladies and gentlemen, one of the great Republicans of all time, the Vice President of the United States, Nelson A. Rockefeller.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Delegates to the convention. Turn up the mic. Delegates to the convention, fellow Americans. Last night in this hall, the Republican Party made history.
You have to eat that thing, Nelson.
First, it endorsed the solid achievements of the first person ever to hold the office of President of the United States by appointment. The man who brought this nation successfully through one of the gravest constitutional crises, Gerald R. Ford. Second, in the spirit of spirited contest, it showed everyone how in our society a political party can choose its standard bearer by open balloting with the world watching. Third, it showed how the contest was resolved. The contenders could meet afterwards with mutual respect and goodwill and pledge their joint efforts for the party and for the nation. I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, where else in the world would the winner go to call on the runner-up? And in how many places in the world would he be received by the runner-up at all? Much less be greeted so graciously as was Gerald Ford last night by Ronald Reagan. When we came here, it was my hope, and I believe the hope of most Americans, that out of this convention would come a reunited, reinvigorated Republican Party. A party determined to meet the nation's problems with new solutions, grounded on historic American principles. A giant step was taken in that direction last night. Tonight, we take another such step. For tonight, we choose a running mate for our presidential candidate. And for that, we need to choose, first and foremost, a person who could serve as president if, God forbid, the president himself could no longer serve. Secondly, a person who is devoted to the principles of the Republican Party and not only the fundamental principles of our American system of government, but also the principles of our unique enterprise system, to our personal liberty and our individual economic freedoms. Third, a person who can be a partner of our president and our presidential candidate in this election and an aid to our president in the discharge of his duties. You and I know such a man. If emergency required, he could serve as our chief executive, for he knows the ways of government. He has served local government as a county attorney for 4 years. He has served his state as a legislator. He has served in the federal government, first elected as a member of the House of Representatives, serving for 8 years, and thereafter elected as a senator, a United States senator, now serving in his second term. He knows our economic system. He has served in 2 of the most important committees of the Senate, the new Budget Committee and the Senate Finance Committee. How can you turn up the mics? They can't hear. How can they turn up the mics? There's a podium and their mic won't go up. You better turn them up. He understands the complexities of modern economic life. He never loses sight of what really makes our enterprise system tick. He knows what it takes to have a healthy farm economy. He knows how vital America's farm families and their productivity are to feeding the world. He knows that our founding fathers did not ordain that all wisdom should be derived from the District of Columbia. But that the great driving force of this nation was to be found in the common people of America, in their cities, in their hometowns and their farms, in our individual enterprise system, in our voluntary efforts. He has lived this knowledge not only in his public life, but in his civic associations, his professional activities, and in his philanthropic causes. He is a person of compassion. He has never forgotten the sacrifices of others, our Vietnam POWs, the families of our men missing in action, the handicapped who have no greater champion. He knows, too, how precious is the gift of freedom. He knows that every generation of Americans must secure that freedom again and again by its own sacrifices. He has lived this knowledge, too, through 5.5 years of combat in World War II, twice wounded and twice decorated for heroic achievement. He has that quality of candor, of openness, of forthrightness, so needed in our times, in the executive posts of our government, in the legislative process, and in our political campaigns and our political candidates. He is able, articulate, courageous, and decisive. He is a man who can pass the test once put up by that great and beloved Missourian from Independence who said so aptly, "If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen." The man of whom I speak can take the heat, ladies and gentlemen. And if you ask those of us who really know him, he can not only take it, believe me, he can really dole it out. I have the honor to nominate as the Republican candidate for the Vice Presidency of the United States the distinguished son of Kansas, Senator Robert J. Dole.
CBS News coverage of the Republican National Convention will continue in a moment.
CBS News continues its special report, Campaign 76. Tonight, the final session of the Republican National Convention from the Kemper Arena in Kansas City. This portion is sponsored by the people of Ford Motor Company on behalf of Ford and Lincoln Mercury dealers. Ford wants to be your car company. Now here again is Walter Cronkite.
There's a modest demonstration for the choice of President Ford as his running mate. Robert Dole, senator from Kansas, has just been placed before the convention by Nelson Rockefeller, the vice president, the current vice president. But this demonstration certainly is nothing like those raucous and even rambunctious ones last night for Ford and for the man who came so close to unseating him, Ronald Reagan. Sunflowers from the state of Kansas. This demonstration is not scheduled to go on anything like any of those last night. The Ronald Reagan demonstrations in 3 sections lasted an hour and 10 minutes. And whether they would go into the record books if they'd gone to an hour 20, since they were in 3 sections or not, we don't know. But that is the record for William Jennings Bryan back at the turn of the century. One of his demonstrations went an hour and 20 minutes. Now we're going to get seconding speeches, one from Peggy Pinder, quite brilliant blind delegate from Grinnell, Iowa.
Peggy Pinder, who will second the nomination of Senator Robert Dole. Peggy.
I have attended 2 national conventions this summer, primarily concerned with championing the rights of people.
Push them out a little bit closer. Quite a bit closer. Lean over a lot. That's it.
I have attended 2 national conventions this summer, primarily concerned with championing the rights of people. The first was the convention of the largest organization of blind people in this country, the National Federation of the Blind. The second is this convention of the Republican Party. As a blind person, I have long been aware of Senator Dole's support of the aspirations of the blind and other disabled and disadvantaged people in their efforts to become fully participating members of society. The Senator's own life and his efforts on behalf of the disabled and other minorities in federal, legislative, and executive work show that he seeks for the blind and for all others what the Federation's president, Dr. Kenneth Jernigan, calls not charity, but opportunity, not sympathy, but understanding. Senator Dole has led the way in urging the establishment of a barrier-free environment so that all people can participate fully in all aspects of life. The Senator knows that people should be accepted for what they can do and not for what they can't do. He knows that the most severe handicaps facing many minorities are not only the physical barriers, but the attitudes and prejudices that people have. His insistence that he be accompanied by an interpreter for the deaf is an example of his continuing awareness of the barriers between us. I am proud this evening to be able to second the nomination of a man whose life and words so emphatically affirm the American tradition of equal opportunity for all, Senator Robert Dole.
Peggy Pender is 20 years old. She's from Iowa. She graduated this spring, Phi Beta Kappa, magna cum laude from Cornell College in Mount Vernon, Iowa, and she's going to enter as a freshman in the freshman law class at Yale in September. She became blind in her freshman year in high school at Grinnell. Her father, Al Pender, is the editor-publisher of the Grinnell Herald Register, and Peggy had written a letter to President Ford that her father delivered to the President at the White House during a press meeting in Washington last March. She became a delegate to this convention and a Ford booster. Senator Dole has an outstanding record for his aid to the handicapped. And as you know, earlier in the convention, when he made his speech upon being named temporary chairman of this convention, he had his speech translated for the deaf on television. For some reaction to this Dole selection, Mort Dean talked to the president of the Ripon Society. That's a liberal Republican group.
Glenn Gerstel in tow just a few moments ago, and he went down the aisle and has been unable to come back, but the ultra-liberal Ripon Society of the Republican Party has been passing this around to the delegates, and it says the selection of Senator Bob Dole as the president's running mate is disappointing because while it unifies the conservative elements of the GOP, it ignores the moderates in the party who were responsible for Ford's nomination. It does not offer an alternative, but just expresses dissatisfaction with Senator Dole. Over.
Thank you, Morton. Dole, of 38 Republican senators, 14 only are rated more conservative than Dole by the Americans for Conservative Action. Of the entire Senate, of its 100 members, 75 members are rated more liberal, according to the Americans for Democratic Action, the liberal group. Senator Paul Laxalt has just been introduced as a seconder for Senator Dole, and he's getting quite a demonstration, particularly from the Reagan forces. He was the man who placed Reagan's name in nomination for the presidency. He was chairman of Citizens for Reagan. He's a first-term senator from Nevada. That's the Texas delegation, which has been most vociferous in support of Ronald Reagan, with the cheer that they've been giving frequently during these demonstrations. Now, Senator Paul Laxalt.
My fellow delegates, you know, we may not have won, but we fought a good fight. Let me say first that the Ford-Dole ticket has the enthusiastic support of Governor Reagan and I. And I'd like to personally compliment President Ford in making an excellent choice in selecting Bob Dole to run with him. Bob was a great national chairman for the Republican Party. He's a great senator, and he's going to make a great vice president. We're concluding here what I think is the finest, most constructive convention in either party ever. All day long I've been besieged by the press, who are constantly asking, as Americans must be throughout this country, as to whether or not we as Republicans are going to go out of this hall united. I say we will. I'm very proud and happy to second the nomination of my friend and colleague, Senator Bob Dole.
Republican National Convention coverage by CBS News will resume after this message.
country and asked them to tell me what they would like for me to say to you about this convention. And they said to me, Art, if you can get their attention, if you can get past their subconscious and speak directly to their hearts, I would like for you to say the following. That we should be, and we are, a thankful people to have a constitution and a system of government that is self-renewing. Remind them that under our system and the 200 years of liberty and freedom, wherever they have made a mistake, they've gone back and corrected it, and in the process of correcting that mistake, make it possible for you to speak to them tonight.
The last seconding speech for Robert Dole for the vice presidency being made by Arthur A. Fletcher, Assistant Secretary of Labor and Special Assistant to the President.
Also remind them that we are a thankful people. We are a thankful people to have a president who could undergo the most thorough investigation any president has ever had to endure before becoming the President of the United States, and that we are grateful that the Republican Party had such a member among its organization that could endure that, so that he could study our ship safely home from one of the most difficult periods in the nation's history. Let me say that again. Let me say that again. I find that there are too few of people across the country who really appreciate the extensive investigation that Mr. Ford had to endure before he became the President of these United States. And we should make sure that no one is allowed to forget that. And that because he could endure that, he brought courage, he brought integrity, and he brought the capacity to endure and make the lonely decisions that only he could make that helped to turn our economy around, helped to turn our employment circumstances around, and gives us the opportunity to look forward to a future of 4 more years of republicanism with a Bob Dole on the ticket. Bob Dole. Bob Dole has endured much himself. You have heard it said that he has served at the that he has served both at the executive, legislative areas of government, and thus knows it thoroughly. Let me say to you, my delegates, that right now the people are singing our song. They're convinced that the solutions to our problems are not in Washington, D.C., that if they are to be solved, they'll be solved at the city, state, and local level. They're singing our song, which means then that we should elect the ticket of Ford and Dole so that we can implement the kinds of programs that are remedy to our problems and continue to lay the foundation that will endure not only 300 years, another 100 years of security and endurance, but will bring the Republican Party back into the fold as one of the major parties. Finally, let me say that it is important that we have a Republican Party, a strong, powerful Republican Party. We are frightful across this country of the possibilities of a one-party system. So there can be no second chances, no second guesses. I hope that we will all, and I'm sure that we will all, support the Ford-Dole ticket this fall and maintain control of the White House, put some Republicans in Congress, and set this country on the right course for another 100 years. I'm proud, then, to place Robert Dole's name in nomination for the Vice Presidency of the United States.
Arthur Fletcher, Assistant Secretary of Labor, Special Assistant to the President, was the Vice Chairman of the Kansas Republican Party back in the mid-50s when Robert Dole was county attorney out in Russell, Kansas. Also, Kansas is out in the middle of the wheat belt, about 275 miles west of Kansas City here. And incidentally, there's going to be a big barbecue and celebration out there tomorrow, and President Ford's intending to go, along with Robert Dole.
May the chair have the attention of the chairman of the delegation from Maryland.
A Maryland delegate said he wanted to place a name in nomination, and that is why the chairman of this meeting is asking to hear from him. That's Senator Schweiker, of course.
The chairman of the delegation from the state of Maryland.
The chair has the attention of the chairman of the delegation.
The state of Maryland has indicated that it has a candidate to be nominated for the office of vice president. Is the delegation ready to present the name?
Congressman Robert Bauman has a delegation, Mr. Chairman, and Congressman Bauman should be at the platform.
I thank the gentleman. It is now my pleasure to introduce, for the purpose of proposing a name for the nomination of this convention for the Vice President of the United States, one of the most capable members of the House of Representatives, a man who is always on the floor and who is called the conscience of the House of Representatives, a worthy successor to the former great member of the Congress from Iowa, Congressman Gross. And I now take great pleasure in introducing to you the Honorable Robert Bauman, a congressman from the state of Maryland.
Mr. Chairman and my fellow delegates.
In America and good things.
Realistically, what are your chances in the South, sir?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't had the opportunity to look at all the surveys. I understand there are a number of them around, and I wouldn't want to prejudge something I haven't seen.
What is your role going to be? How do you envision your role in this campaign?
A very active campaigner, moving around the country, doing what I can to help President Ford in many areas.
You've been
Do you anticipate being
the
cutting edge when...
Yes, a slashing attack.
Well, I don't know about that. I've known to be partisan at times, but I assume Fritz Mondale is too, so it ought to be a good team.
Do you agree with many people here that Governor Carter has a thin skin and that you may be able to get under it?
Well, he said that. I didn't.
Has Senator Mondale called you?
Yes, called me this morning.
What did he have to say?
He said, welcome. So we like each other. We know each other. We've served with each other for some time. We understand that politics is rough and tumble, but it can still be a decent sport, and we're going to try to do that.
You're looking for a good, clean fight, are you?
Yes. Fight.
Thanks,
Senator.
All right, no.
Congressman Robert Bauman of Maryland is a surprise speaker here to nominate somebody we don't know who it is yet, a mystery guest. And let's listen in.
Decision to stand with my party, I stand with it now. I want to talk to all of you delegates here tonight about our vice presidential candidate. I want to talk to the 1,070 people who voted for Ronald Reagan for president last night. Because we're here, and we're happy that we're here. I want to talk to those who voted for our great President Jerry Ford. I even want to talk to the guy who abstained and the fellow who voted for Elliot Richardson, wherever you are. We need a ticket that embodies the principles of our party, that can appeal to the workers who live down on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay and in Galveston and in Maine, the farmers and the housewives who have to pay the bills once a week, the young people that are turned off from politics. We need a man who understands both parties. And the man I'm talking about tonight is a converted Democrat, and we've got to convert a lot of them. He's a man who isn't afraid to say where he stands in the Senate of the United States of America, while others tiptoe around the supreme issues, not wanting to get caught. This man has always let you know, because he speaks from conviction. He speaks from principle. He is a senator we can admire.
Seems likely that the name he's going to place in nomination is Senator Jesse Helms of North Carolina.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Congressman Bauman is one of the most conservative members of the Congress.
We need a third third party.
He was
I say to you, what
favorite of Reagan.
a good second party, and this is it. In 1960, Barry Goldwater stood at the rostrum in Chicago, and I, as a young member of the staff from the Maryland delegation, heard him tell me, "Grow up, conservatives." We've grown up. The fight here was between two groups of conservatives, and the conservatives will win this year in November. That's progress in our party, ladies and gentlemen. You heard, many of you who listened to Governor Reagan today on television, say that there was something more important than individuals. He said that Governor Reagans will come and go, that presidents will come and go. Lord knows congressmen come and go, and a lot of them ought to go this November. But the point that he was making to us is that our party stands for nothing unless it stands for principle. You know what those principles are, and those of us who call ourselves conservatives want our ticket to stand by those principles this November. It is for that reason that I have the great honor to place in nomination for the Vice Presidency of the United States of America the name of a man who in every way embodies principles. The Senator from the great state of North Carolina, Jesse Helms.
It would have been thought that Congressman Philip Crane, also a very conservative congressman from the state of Illinois, was going to put Senator Helms' name in nomination. Apparently there was a change in that plan. Then Congressman Bowman did the job, as you heard just there. Senator Helms has said that he will have nothing to do with a third-party movement, although there were a lot of rumors to that effect. William Rusher, the head of a third-party conservative movement, and others are meeting in Chicago next weekend, and they were expected to invite Senator Helms to participate in their movement, but he says he will not do that. This nomination will entitle him to come to the floor to withdraw his name, come to the podium, and that gives him a chance to make one last pitch for the conservative cause and possibly also an appeal for unity in this party. Senator Helms was the man who led the fight in the platform committee for a more conservative platform and succeeded in getting a draft minority plank that was approved by this convention on agreement of the Ford forces finally.
Chairman of the state of California,
one that criticized by indirection
does the chairman of the delegation
the official platform or the
at this time?
correction, the policy of the administration in foreign policy. Back to the floor.
Hi, Dave.
No. Does the chairman of the California delegation desire recognition?
We do not, Mr. Chairman.
The chair has also been advised that the chairman of the delegation from Texas desires recognition. Does the chairman of that delegation desire recognition? May the chair have the attention of the chairman of the delegation from Texas.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman of the delegation from Texas.
The Texas delegation is proud to second the nomination of Senator Jesse Helms.
The Texas delegation is 100% for Ronald Reagan, of course. There is a move in the California delegation to get behind Senator Helms. Sylvia Chase reports. Sylvia?
Yes, Walter. I have with me John Felice. He's a sergeant in the Los Angeles Police Department, and he's counting votes in California for Jesse Helms. How many votes do you have, Sergeant
I would say
Felice?
at the present time, a hard count of approximately 56.
How many do you expect to get?
We could get as many as 90.
As many as 90 votes in California. What is this all about? Why are you doing this?
I think individuals want to rally at this point
around
with
Jesse
an individual who nominated Ronald Reagan for the presidency of the United States.
Thank you. He told me before that it was to hold action for 1980, Walter, when they hope to have conservatives on the ticket again.
Sylvia, this cheer going up is because Jesse Helms has just been introduced, and here he is at the podium.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, 9 days ago, Mr. Chairman, 9 days ago, I arrived in Kansas City in the hope that I might, in some small way, participate in some of the judgments and decisions to be made by this convention. In particular, I wanted to emphasize as best I could my strong conviction that in this crucial election year, the Republican Party needs to realize more than ever before that if we don't make it on principle, we're not going to make it at all. I felt specifically that our party, in the light of the bizarre transactions by the Democrats in New York a few weeks ago, it was, and it still is, imperative that this party, the Republican Party, make a covenant with the American people. I appeared before the distinguished platform committee and was graciously and cordially received. And at that time, I tried to emphasize that this year, perhaps more than any other in the history of the Republic, it is important that we say what we mean and mean what we say. And the way to do that was through a firm, forthright, and unequivocal platform. And thanks to the tremendous support of countless dedicated delegates, we have an excellent platform that we can proudly take to the American people. And now we must go to the American people. We must run on that platform. We must not discard it in the name of politics as usual. The American people are fed up with that sort of thing. Let's make the Democrats defend, if they can, and they can't, the document that they produced. It is at once both vague and frightening. There's a deeper meaning to the awesome challenge facing us, deeper perhaps than we ourselves realize at this moment in the excitement of this occasion. In fact, what we do here should and can be the prelude to a sort of spiritual rebirth across this land. The American people believe in God, and now is the time for us to show it. The American people are worried about the forces in our society that seem to be tearing down the moral fabric of our nation, particularly as it is centered around the family. And they see government as threatening the more moral order, and they are concerned about the secularization of education, as though God didn't matter in the classroom. They are worried about the textbooks and the federal government manipulation of the curriculum. In other words, our platform, the one we adopted here this week, speaks to the concerns of the American people in these and many other matters. It is our covenant, it is our pledge, and we must live up to it. And I pledge to you that in my way, small as it is, I will do everything to see that we do. Now, Mr. Chairman, as a result of my small role in the development of this platform, delegates from a number of states asked me to allow my name to be placed in nomination. I was, of course, humbled by their suggestion, but in a moment I'm going to ask that my name be withdrawn from consideration. While I have been informed that a number of delegates from about 20 to 22 states are prepared to vote for me, and while I am deeply grateful for their expression of support, I would want them to know that Bob Dole is one of my best friends in the United States Senate. Bob Dole is a fine American. He is a distinguished senator, and on top of everything else, he had the good judgment to marry a North Carolina girl. Mr. Chairman, I extend my congratulations and my best wishes to my friend Bob Dole, and I ask that my name be withdrawn from consideration. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Quite a mild speech by Senator Jesse Helms of North Carolina, and in essence a plea for unity in the party. The Republican National Convention coverage by CBS News will resume after this message.
Will now call the roll of states for the votes cast for the candidate for Vice President. The Secretary from the great state of Arizona, Mrs. Mary Crisp.
Secretary Mary Crisp is beginning the roll call for the nomination for Vice Presidency.
37 votes.
Madam Secretary, Alabama requests that the microphone be left on for a request for a poll of the delegation.
It's not likely to be a popular call here tonight. This convention now is in a mood, I think, to get on with the business of hearing the acceptance speeches.
Of the chairman of the delegation from Alabama, would he please report the name of the delegate or delegates demanding that the delegation be polled?
Mr. Jimmy Holloman.
Mr. Holloman.
Delegations are polled for internal political purposes in the state to expose how individual delegates are voting. It means that every name must be called
Jimmy Holloman
of the entire 37
of the Alabama
delegation.
The Secretary of the Convention will poll the delegation.
Mr. Holloman is a Reagan delegate, as are all of them in Alabama. It's a solid Reagan state. He's from Bessemer, a lawyer. And now we will go through the call of every name, 37 names of the Alabama delegation.
Gave his right arm to this country, Bob Dole. Collins votes for Dole. Wallace Stanfield.
Would you please call the alternate for Wallace Stanfield?
Mr. J.C. Fowler.
I think there's an unusual
the alternate
here.
is across their numbered places.
The total vote for Alabama was never announced.
Alternate W.F.
Which gives us
Joseph
a little puzzle as to why
Joseph votes for Dole.
Why this poll at all. Was there a split in the Alabama delegation? Or some of them not voting for Dole? Or most of them not voting for Dole?
Hunt
So far, they're going down
Dole.
the line for Dole.
William G. Bill Waldrop.
William Waldrop votes for Reagan.
This may have been the purpose of the
Waldrop votes for Reagan.
of the poll right there, is to begin to get some Reagan votes
Leonard
out onto the floor
Wilson.
here in the very first state call.
Chairman, I proudly cast my vote for a resident of my congressional district, the man who defeated Jimmy Carter's postcard registration bill, United States Senator James B. Allen of Alabama.
Delegate Wilson votes for Senator Allen. G.R. Robin Swift, Jr.
Robin Swift casts his vote for Senator Bob Dole.
Swift votes for Dole. Thomas L. Hurt.
Thomas L. Hurt casts his vote for Bob Dole.
Hurt
So
votes
far,
for
there's
Dole.
no indication in the
William
first 10
L.
votes that there's any big
Acker
Reagan
Jr.
movement here. Just one
Acker
Reagan vote
for
so
Dole.
far. There's another one for Dole.
Acker votes for Dole. Sue Matheson Steele.
Sue Steele wanted to vote for Jesse Helms, but since he is withdrawn, she votes for Dole.
Delegate Steele votes for Dole. B.B.R. Frederick, Jr.
Frederick votes for Dole.
Frederick votes for Dole. Robert B. French.
Bob French votes for Dole.
French votes for Dole. Peggy Noel.
In the spirit of a Republican Party victory, Peggy Noel casts her vote for Senator Dole.
There doesn't seem to be any big
votes for
Alabama
Dole.
movement, certainly, up to now
Albert
for
Lee
Reagan.
Smith, Jr.
Madam Secretary, I plan to cast my vote for Senator Helms, but since he is withdrawn, I now cast my vote for Senator Dole.
Votes
It doesn't
for
look
Dole.
like this was intended as the beginning of a draft
George
Reagan
Nichols from
movement tonight, the
Tuscaloosa,
movement that Reagan himself discouraged all day long, although a number of states worked overnight to put together a draft movement. But he said definitely he would not do it, despite the fact that when he met with President Ford earlier today, he had left the door open to such a draft.
Weidman votes for Helms. Arthur R. Outlaw.
Outlaw votes for Dole.
Outlaw votes for Dole. Paul Parham II.
Paul Parham votes for Dole.
Parham votes for Dole. John A. Roberts.
John Robertson votes for Dole.
Roberts votes for Dole.
This sort of procedure
A.
must
Herbert Morton
throw the
Jr.
Ford people
Herbert
and
Morton votes for Jesse Helms.
the convention managers
Morton
into
votes
considerable
for Helms.
unhappiness.
J.B. Phillips.
They've carefully planned this evening's proceedings, of course, to bring President Ford and his acceptance speech before the American people by television at the optimum time of the evening to reach all sections of the country.
Orville Hugh
And this is a
Matheson.
delaying tactic. Whether it's a tactic or not, let me correct that. I do not know that it's a tactic.
James
It is a
M.
delay.
Sizemore Jr.
Sizemore votes for Dole.
Sizemore votes for Dole. Stephen J. Steve Allen.
As one Democrat who turned Republican because of principle, Steve Allen votes for another, Jesse Helms.
Allen votes for Helms. Bryce F. Marsh.
Bryce Marsh from Blount County proudly cast a vote for a great senator, a great congressman, a great senator, a statesman, and a Christian, Jesse Helms.
Marsh votes for Helms. Fred W. Apt.
Fred W. Apt votes for Senator Dole.
Apt votes for Dole. Dorthen Wadsworth.
Senator Dole.
Wadsworth votes for Dole. Terry W. Tarkenton.
Tarkington votes for Baker of Tennessee.
Senator
Tennessee was thought to be the man in the front in the run for the vice presidential nod from President Ford. And it wasn't until Senator Dole was named at Prop 7:30 this morning in Kansas City that it was known that Baker had lost out. Baker was an obviously disappointed man when he met the news media today.
Upon the recommendation of Senator Helms, votes for Senator Dole.
Graham votes for Dole. John C. Adams.
Adams votes for Dole.
Adams votes for Dole. Robert Thomason.
Thomason votes for Dole.
Thomason votes for Dole. Wayne W. Killian.
Been some
Killian votes
question
for Dole.
through the night as to
Killian
whether
votes for
in
Dole.
their half-hour
Richard
meeting
Rome.
early this morning after President
votes
Ford
for
had been
Dole.
nominated and Ronald
Rome
Reagan's
votes for
political
Dole.
career had
J.A.
ended
Jimmy
on the floor of
Solomon.
this convention. He is 65. He can hardly run for national office again.
R.E.
Whether President
Robinson.
Ford had offered to Ronald Reagan
votes for
the vice presidential spot.
Robinson votes for
And
Dole.
rather reports now that Ronald Reagan's brother Neil has been telling people that President Ford did not offer it, and he's gotten a confirmation of that from Reagan News Secretary Jim Lake. So Ronald Reagan was not offered the second spot by President Ford in that half-hour meeting this morning, which incidentally was private between the two men. A vote will now be announced. Senator Helms picked up some votes, and maybe that was the purpose of the poll. Internal politics in a state being what they are, the delegates perhaps wanted to get on record that some of them were standing firm behind Helms, despite the fact he withdrew his nomination.